The European Union introduced legislation yesterday that is, well, it's a very comprehensive climate plan. It's called Fit for 55. And I'm going to be talking about it with Dr. Stephen Hill, who's the Associate Director of the Trent School of the Environment at Trent University. And welcome to the interview, Stephen.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Markham.
Well, look, I guess the question is, the Europeans have been looked upon as leaders in climate policy for a long time now. What impact will their new legislation, because there's some very innovative things like carbon border levies in it, how influential is that going to be in other countries like the US, Canada, China, and so on?
I think it's going to have a ripple effect because you're going to see others trying to watch and learn to see what's happening in Europe. They're going to, especially with this carbon border adjustment mechanism, to see how is it going to play out? You know, what sectors are they going to start with? Probably some of the sectors that are most susceptible to carbon leakage. You know, places where carbon would be produced somewhere else, and then those products would be imported into the EU, displacing the carbon dioxide, but not actually reducing it. So I think people are going to be watching to see how the institutions and how the regulations emerge for those carbon border adjustment mechanisms to watch and learn, right? And that's there's an interest for sure in other countries and other regions that are moving fast on, trying to move quickly on greenhouse gases and reducing them, including Canada, Japan, the Americans right now under Joe Biden. They're looking at this because they recognize that you have to try to minimize that leakage. And if you're going to start increasing your prices of carbon, as we in Canada have proposed with our carbon pricing mechanisms, you have to pay attention to the leakage.
Now, I think it's fair to say that there are always leaders within a particular region. Like in Canada, around the carbon tax, for instance, so Canada looked to British Columbia, which introduced its a carbon tax in 2007 and has been kind of seen as a case study. In the United States, it's California. And so I guess everybody's looking at everybody, at the leaders, to find out, what lessons can be learned. But I think you make a point that there's also that country or regions has its own social and political context. So it's not like you just import one set of policies. Oh, the EU is doing it, we'll do it over in Canada or the United States. It's not quite like that.
Yeah, you can't just take and replicate a good idea, something that works in one place and copy it in another place. There's a reason that that gun control is such a central issue in the United States, right? That it's different in other parts of the world, that you can't own a gun in many countries, or that there's so much more gun regulations in Canada than there are in the United States. And that's a social and cultural context to understanding these issues. And climate change is very much about, and reducing greenhouse gases and how we interact with energy and how we consume it is this social and technical system that's all combined together. And so if we forget the social, if we forget the cultural, and forget the political in trying to make sense of this, then it won't succeed. And so these solutions, these policy solutions, have to make social sense and political sense where they're being implemented. So the carbon tax in British Columbia is a really innovative and useful policy, may not make sense in another jurisdiction. And that's one of the things about Canada as a federation. We have these provinces that are really like policy experiments or policy labs. And so when you have the backstop, the way the feds have done with their pricing, it lets the provinces, in theory, choose their own mechanism to follow through and do things that make sense in that political context. So,
on an international level, does it help that we have global institutions where nations can come together, with this ICPP or whatever it is, and share lessons, share policy lessons, and so on? Does that help to speed up the development of, say, climate policy in other countries?
I think so, but since Paris, it's been more of the nationally determined contribution, right? Since the Paris Accord, which was different than the trying to have some kind of hard law or solid agreement, the Kyoto Protocol and the other agreements that followed from that had clear expectations of what countries are supposed to do. The penalties were always vague, but that nationally determined contribution is really a reflection of this need for a bottom-up country determined, regionally determined approach to solving the challenges of climate change, reducing greenhouse gases. The hope is that, of course, that we have this some sort of catalytic conversion in the next couple of years, so that this decade can be the major structural changes to our social and technical systems of consuming and producing energy, right? So we're not there yet in terms of a global shift or a global transition. We need to have some kind of catalytic change, and this kind of Fit for 50, the European climate plan that's just been announced is that kind of potential catalyst that can move things in a really positive direction. Right? People are looking for leadership, and they're looking for innovation. They're looking for change, and then they can copy. They can take what they see there and put it in their own context or their own place. So there's hope. That's I'm always hopeful when I see something that's moving us, because we've had so many decades and years of all talk and no action.
Now, Stephen, we had the IEA release its net zero by 2050 scenario not that long ago, got a lot of attention. And the IEA said that basically there are two things that have to happen in order to get net zero by 2050. One of them is technology change has to speed up. And I think arguably it is. Whether it'll be fast enough or not, we'll wait and see. But it is definitely accelerating. Well, the other is climate policy. Governments have to get more and more serious about this. And I would argue that the EU is giving us a big bump in that direction. And whereas 2 years ago, I was thinking, hey, net zero by 2050 would be really tough. Now I'm beginning, I think a lot of people are thinking, maybe it's possible. And it's partly due to the government leadership by, governments like the EU. What's your take on that?
Well, of course, we have to accelerate this, right? We have to move. We have to move quickly, and the transition will require government leadership. This is not something that you and I can do on our own by changing our individual behavior, right? So there's a bottom-up social rationality to the choices and the things that how the transition will unfold, but it does need government choices and government leadership. That might be through the pricing mechanism, and might be through explicitly choosing technologies. And so whether it's electrification of transportation, urban design, building retrofits become really complicated and complex because the nature of all of the actors and the constituent technologies that are part of that, whether it's the heating system or the cooling system or the building envelope. That's a complex system, and that social and technical regime has to change. But it does obviously require government leadership through policy mechanisms. The climate policy is often also going to be layered onto other initiatives, right? That as a citizen, as a voter, climate change is important to me, but it may not be the number one issue for everyone. Even though I think it's an enormous issue, others are going to be very interested in social justice, in equity, in competitiveness, economic development, jobs, rebuilding their communities. And so all of those other political imperatives need to be layered on top of climate policy.
Well, final question, Stephen. Looking forward over the next few months, let's say the rest of 2021, what should viewers be looking for, before the ripple effects of the EU legislation and their Fit for 55 program?
Well, I think one of the things that needs to happen is that you need stability in the climate policy initiatives. So you can't have a shift in the United States every 4 years where the climate policies are put in place and then unwound. And the same thing in Canada, that you need to have some consistency. And so what that requires is either governments being in place for 8, 10, 15 years, which is not common, or to have a solid political consensus around the need to take action. So it requires the major parties to agree on the structural and key elements of climate policy that are needed. When you have the political divisiveness that we see right now in the United States on this issue, it becomes impossible. one of the reasons the European Union is able to move is that they have a social and political consensus on the need for action. And it's then a debate about the nature of the instruments, the policy instruments that you're trying to use.
Stephen,
So-
thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Okay, thanks, Marco.